All right, welcome everybody. Nice to see you all. Happy Thursday, happy Parsha Day. Been calling this class the Torah of Elul because we're in the month of Elul, which is a month of spiritual preparation and readiness for this season of tshuva, of return. Let me just admit that this is really just my regular Parsha class, and I'm just calling it the Parsha, the Torah of Elul, because it's Elul. And I have been trying though to shift a little bit of our focus so that we're really thinking about the themes of this month, so that as we study the Torah, we're also doing that kind of internal work. So thinking about themes of tshuva, of repentance, return, rectification in the weekly Torah reading, or themes of love and intimacy with God. That's one of the themes of Elul, or just themes of spiritual preparation. Today, I have to say, I'm not really hitting the mark on that goal today. I really we're just going to study some Torah today. That is to say, it would have been easy enough in this week's Parsha. This is Parshat Ki Tavo, which speaks about coming into the land of Israel. When you come, Ki Tavo. And, it would have been like easy enough to go deep into the curses, because Parshat Ki Tavo has this long list of curses. There are two main tochachot. What do we call them? Rebukes. Long lists of curses that we're being threatened with if we do wrong in the Torah. So there's repentance for you, I guess. But it's just like, I don't know. I was too exhausted to do that. It's like I don't feel like doing curses today. Do you? I just needed a little bit of good old-fashioned Torah, and that in a sense is exactly how I want to justify the Elul lens that I've claimed for this month today, and that is to say that during Elul, during this time of spiritual preparation, when we think about the relationships in our lives, the relationships that we have with God, the relationship that we have with ourselves, I feel like one of the things that we ought to do if we're in this tradition is to think about the relationship that we have with Torah, and to do tshuva, to do spiritual work and a reflection and maybe rectification there too. Like, what is my relationship with Torah? And because I certainly feel like Torah is one of the things that has sustained me over the past year, like in a deep way, has been like a source of life for me. And so maybe I do need to do some tshuva around that, some thoughtfulness, some reflection, some spiritual reflection on what my relationship is with Torah. How am I attending to that relationship? And what is Torah in my life, and what is the purpose of it? And those questions we will be asking today. We're going to be looking at one of my pieces of Torah that I've always loved, but a piece that really gets to the big questions of what the purpose of the Torah is altogether. Okay, so with that little teaser, let's say a blessing over our Torah study this morning, afternoon, noon, whatever. Okay, a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. All right, we are going to begin today with our journey. Today begins with the stones, right? The same way we began the hour with the stones. We're going to take a look at stones, and the entry point for me in thinking about the Parsha this week was to look again at this strange commandment to build stone structures, and a couple of stone structures. And so first thing I want to do is just to think about this structure and what's going on here, because it's quite strange. as you know, the Torah often is. So let's take a look here. I shared it with you, right? It's in the chat. Yeah, great. Okay, so here is where we are. We're towards the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and the Parsha started Ki Tavo. When you come into the land of Israel, the first thing that is mentioned is the ceremony of the first fruit offering that you will offer, the bikurim that you will offer when you come into the land of Israel and settle it and are able to grow produce. And then there's this. Moses and the elders of Israel charged the people, saying, observe all the commandment. It's a little bit of a funny phrase, but that's the way it is. Kol ha-mitzvah, all the commandment that I command you this day. As soon as you have crossed the Jordan into the land that the eternal your God is giving you, you shall set up large stones. Okay, that's just a weird thing. I like right there. This is like, it's already a little weird. You go into the land as soon as you cross the Jordan. They're going to cross the Jordan River into up into the land of Israel. It's sort of like this kind of movement. They go up and over. So if you can follow my cursor there. So so as soon as you do that, you shall set up large stones and coat them with plaster. Sadata otam besid, and inscribe upon them all the words of this Torah. Okay, so that's it. That's the main thing that I want us to be looking at and thinking about and trying to understand today is this structure. There are these stones, and on the stones the Torah is written, and that you do that as soon as you enter into the land of Israel. Okay, that's like, wow, that's interesting. And there's just plaster around them. It's like a whole thing. Okay, so let's just, that's what we have to think about, but let's just look a few more lines here, because there's more stone building. What's the word for stone building? Masonry. There's more masonry here. So take a look. Okay, so you do this, you coat them with plaster, you write all the words of the Torah. When you cross over to enter the land that the eternal your God is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey, as the eternal, the God of your fathers promised you upon crossing the Jordan, you shall set up these stones about which I charge you this day here on Mount Ebal and coat them with plaster. Okay, so that was just like repeat. There too, you shall build an altar to the eternal your God, an altar of stones. Oh, more stones. There were these big stones with plaster. Now there's mizbach havanim, an altar of stones. And interestingly, okay, so now you have two stone structures. One's an altar. We know what an altar is. You make sacrifices on the altar. What the other thing is, we're not sure. But interestingly, then says you must build the altar of the eternal your God of unhewn stones. Here in the Hebrew, it's avanim shlemot, complete stones, uncut stones. You shall offer on it burnt offerings to the eternal your God. You shall sacrifice their offerings of well-being and eat them rejoicing before the eternal your God. And this is actually the line that we're going to focus the most on eventually, not quite yet. But there's a reminder here on those stones. And now, to be honest, I'm not sure which stones they're talking about. Is it the altar or is it the pillars? But on those stones, you shall inscribe every word of this Torah. Well expounded. Ber hetev. Okay. So what's going on here? I want to just turn and wonder with you. And yeah, let's just stop there. Let's stop there and just wonder about this sort of Jewish Stonehenge, right? These pillars, these big stones that will have the Torah written on them. And you set those up as soon as you go into the land. I see my mother has a comment. Yes. Yeah, good. So my mother points out that the stones are very specifically, and it says twice, to be coated with plaster. So that's like part of it. It's not just you set up stones and you engrave into them. We have some memory of that with like the tablets of stone that Moses received. And, you know, you were building the altar of stones, but with the pillars of stones, it says to coat them with plaster, and then as if there's like, it was easy clay or something. It's easier to write in. It makes it easier to write on this plaster, right? Potentially that's what it is. It's like the thing that makes it easier to write on. So I'm not sure, but I think that's part of it. It's the writing. Okay. Noah.
Yeah, for these stones I'm seeing at the entrance, once we got into Israel, sort of like in Lord of the Rings, that you had this area at the river entering Gondor with these statues of the kings at so they're seeing these stones with the Torah on them, and all over these stones at the entrance and at Har Gerizim, Har Ebal, the mountains with the blessings and the curses. I'm assuming this is at Har Ebal was the blessing mountain, so they have an altar also with the Torah on it, also with all these blessings and curses and everything else. So what do we make of that?
Right.
We'll find out.
That's right. So Noah begins to paint for us the larger scene. I've kind of zoomed into these stones, but there's a larger scene that the whole of Parshat Ki Tavo is sketching out for us, and it looks like this. I mean, this is a big description in Parshat Ki Tavo. Maybe I should have included it, but we'll just speak it out. There's a ceremony that you perform on Har Ebal, where you face each other on two mountains, Har Gerizim and Har Ebal, and you proclaim blessings and curses. And it seems that the stones are to be placed in the middle, potentially. It's not clear where the stones are, but perhaps that's where they're part of this ceremony. And so as you recite the blessings and curses as you enter the land of Israel, you look at these stones. You have maybe what this is for is a kind of, when you perform a ritual or take some kind of oath or something like that, you look like you face the stone so that you can be looking at the Torah, so that you can have the Torah in front of you. All right. I'm sorry, that's a lot of information to throw your way, and I don't actually want to focus too much on that ceremony today, but Noah's not wrong that one of the ways we might think about these stones is that they perform a specific function for us in a specific ritual. And so it's a little weird, yes, but these stones will be part of the opening ceremony. And in the opening ceremony, there will be these pillars, these stone pillars with our faith inscribed upon them. Okay, let's keep going a little more. I see a lot of hands, but I'm going to take a few of them and then press a little bit forward. Florine?
My husband was a stone sculptor, so this bothers me a lot. Stone, when you crack off the skin, the outer covering, has layers of geological and history of creation, number one. Number two, Isamu Noguchi and many sculptors, including my husband, when they crack open a stone, they always say the same thing. Stone speaks to you where it wants to go in its next creative force. And three, my big question then is, why would they put plaster over a stone, which is representative of creation? Why didn't they just hewn the Torah into the stone?
Good. The great questions. Great questions. Florine, our poet in residence, giving very deep, profound description of what a stone is. And we have to. These things are symbols, and the element and the form is important. We have this, take a look at in this passage, there's no question that it's a repeating word, right? Like if you look at that passage, you see that it says stones, 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 stones. Now, having said that, here, why don't we take a look? It says stones like 4 or 5 times in this short passage. And having said that, Florine picks up on the question my mother was wondering about. What's up with the plaster on these stones when the altar of stones is specifically supposed to be untouched, uncut, unhewn? I must say, is anyone? I'll let someone else make the connect. Anyone have something about those unhewn stones that they want to say before I spoil it? Okay. The unhewn stones is also a strange thing to say, but it so happens that there is another almost exactly the same kind of verse way back in the book of Exodus, just after Mount Sinai. Exodus chapter 20, when one of the things, Moses goes up into the, stratosphere, and one of the few things that we begin to we're given a few laws right there, because they're going to be around Sinai, and one of them is build an altar so that you can make offerings to me. And it says there, this is your next source, and if you make for me an altar of stones, do not build it of hewn stones, meaning cut stones, for by wielding your sword upon them, you have profaned them. So this is, Florine, I think, would like this verse. Don't ruin the stone. Let it be, or maybe not, because after all, her husband was a sculptor of stones. So maybe the whole point is to cut into it. But the connection here is what I want to focus on. There's something about this that is a callback to Sinai. Now, if that's true, think about it. Then things get interesting, because way back in the book of Exodus, we had Mount Sinai, where we got the Torah and came down with 2 tablets of stone. And then we were told to build an altar and not to cut the stones. And so now there's a little bit of an echo. Like when you cross over into the land of Israel, there's something about it that's like a replay of that Exodus experience, that Sinai experience. Okay, so let's throw that out there to play with as well. Payam?
Anytime you see stones in the Bible, it's an allusion to Jacob, because that's his motif. If you read the story of Jacob, it's always rocks and stones. He slept, he put his head on a rock. And I think it sort of makes sense, the 12 tribes coming in and allusion back. So if you think about plaster, we're entering a new land. We're sort of saying we are that history, but we need to change it. So we change the form of the stone with plaster to enter the new land and become a new people.
Interesting. Okay, good. This is like the first interpretation of the plaster that we've heard. A nice interpretation of the plaster. There's something about stones that, just asking, what is the function of stones in our tradition? Payam's right. They've been used in our tradition for the tablets, as I just mentioned, but Jacob in particular was obsessed with creating monuments, stone monuments. Jacob has the dream of the ladder, sets up a stone monument. Right? Jacob makes a covenant with his father-in-law, sets up a stone monument. Like so this is a Jacob thing. We're the Jacob children. And then Payam says, so why the plaster? Okay, but we're doing it our own way. Like this is a new layer, a new cover, okay, good. That's nice. All right, a couple more interpretations. Wayne.
Regarding the plaster, I was concerned about its non-permanence, that it doesn't last as long as a message that might be carved into stone. And I was wondering if that was intentional, sort of that we'd have to repair it over time, and maybe just as the Torah is reinterpreted on a regular basis, so is the words we put on these stones in plaster. And then I also was concerned about how would we inscribe the words of the Torah, the entire Torah, before it's done? How is it that we would know what to write on those stones if we're still in the middle of it? Or not in the middle, but toward the end of it. But did we know that when it was being written?
Yeah. Okay, good. Let me just address the second question first, because there's something almost technical about it. Like when we use the word Torah in the Torah, what are we talking about? And it actually seems like it's used in many different ways. So we're never quite sure that we're not. In fact, the translation often says this instruction, right upon, as if you were only what you were gonna write was and some people think just this passage, or just the curses and blessings of Haram Eval of the two mountains ceremony that Noah talked about. I think for our purposes today, and this is one of the instances where you certainly could read it as the whole book that you receive, this record, this book. And I don't know, maybe it isn't finished yet, but once it is, you will read. I think for our purposes today, let's just think about it as the Torah. But you could, you're right to play with that, and if someone else wants to, that is a true vagary in this. The other thing you said though about the plaster being a kind of it was fascinating the way you put it. It's almost like the plaster allows you to erase it, because the writing on the plaster will fade in a way that writing on stones won't. And so every so often you'll have to re-plaster, potentially, you're imagining, and I think this is an incredible vision, to re-plaster and then to write again. Okay, so I want to take a pause here now to make sure that we actually, I have not yet begun to fight. I have not yet gotten to the key piece of Torah that I wanted to share with you, and that is the next piece of Torah. And Wayne's comments take me there, because as Wayne wonders about, well, what will be written? Like, how will it be written, and will it be written again and again? And what exactly will be written? Is it all the Torah? Okay, so there's one answer, one version of an answer to that question that is brought by Rashi, that is quite striking and also totally perplexing, doesn't make any sense. So let's take a look at it. It's very, very quick, but this is really where I was heading with this stone ceremony. You set them up, you coat them with plaster, and then you inscribe every word. And this is why, Wayne, I think Kol Divrei HaTorah, it sounds a little bit like whatever is going to be part of this book that is Torah. I don't know. But anyway, Be'er Hetev, well expounded. Be'er Hetev, this is the phrase in Hebrew. Well expounded. This is like, it's related to the language for like a well, but the other meaning of well in Hebrew. So like it well dug into, Anyway, why does it say Be'er Hetev? Why does it say well expounded? Arlene, I think you were not muted. Why does it say well expounded? That's going to be the entry point here. Why that extra phrase? And Rashi just says just two words. And Rashi being sort of like famously laconic here. Two words, well expounded in 70 languages. Shivim Lashon. Okay, now that's not pshat. That's not like, oh, that's what it means. But it's a midrash. It's a midrash that Rashi is bringing. It's a midrash that exists all over the place. And that's what Rashi is telling us that Be'er Hetev means. Be'er Hetev, well expounded, means translated into 70 languages. So now you go into Israel, the commandment, as Rashi imagines it, you go into Israel, you set up these stones. I don't know how many. The truth is, I should disclose, this happens. Joshua, go look in the book of Joshua, you'll see they actually do this. And the number then is 12 stones, one for each of the tribes. But I can't tell if that's already true here. There's no mention of the number here. Maybe that's a feature of the more nationalistic book of Joshua, but whatever. Now you got these like stones. Imagine like Stonehenge, Except the Torah is written on these stones in 70 languages. in 70 languages. Now that's interesting. Now, I must say, and some of you may know, why 70 languages? Why 70? It's like strange. Yeah, Arlene, do you know the answer to this? Arlene is raising her hand. Yeah, Arlene, please chime in. You stopped video instead. Arlene.
Okay, well, the 70 languages is because of the Mount Bob, but the tower.
Yes, that's correct.
So that's the reason, because the 70 languages is for the 70 languages of the world.
Arlene, turn back on your camera. I want to see you. I was just seeing you.
Oh.
You turned off your camera as you went to speak.
Yeah.
You don't have to. You don't have to. I'm sorry. I'm interrupting you. Go ahead. Keep it. Now you're muted again. Just technology, you know? It's like the bane of all of our existence. Okay, keep going.
Oh, no,
Arlene.
the host has started to, no, here I am.
Here you are, Arlene.
So you see me? Because I don't see them on my phone.
Yes,
well,
yes,
no, it's that, but because of the 70 languages, is because they're putting these stones in Israel, right when you enter. So I read this in the Midrash, but it's for the Gentiles. It's to know that in Israel, you've got to follow the Noah laws. Ooh, and that if you don't, you're going to be like evil, because it's to say, tell them not to do anything that's evil and not to do idol worship.
Okay.
You've got to follow the laws of the Jews, so that you won't be sin and wiped out, and God's wrath on you.
Okay, Arlene, thank you so much. Arlene takes us many giant steps forward. Arlene is right, first of all, that this 70 is a reference to a legend that the rabbis read into the Tower of Babel story. And one of the opinions of the Tower of Babel is that they were scattered into 70 nations. Remember, God just makes them all speak different languages, so 70 different languages. In other words, the 70 here represents the languages of the world, right? In the Midrashic imagination, originally there was one language, and then there were 70 languages. And so the idea is to write the Torah in every language of the world, right? And now I'm wondering about Wayne's plaster, because now you would have to write many more languages right onto the Torah, if the idea is to capture that fullness, the Torah in every expression. Or not, I don't know, maybe you write it in the 70 original languages, but now it's like a very, that's a very different kind of structure. What is the point of a structure? You set up these stone monuments and write it in any language that anyone could read, not just Hebrew, and most languages that you can't read. Right. So what's that for? And Arlene begins to wonder, and it seems like one of the answers you might give is these monuments are set up for non-Israelites. Like, here's the Torah, take a look. Everyone's welcome. I mean, I don't know. One way to think about it is just come and read the Torah. It's tremendous. You'll love it. I don't know, they're going into a land that has other nations. Will they eventually be visited by other nations? Like now we've got these, it feels like something you'd see at the UN, but more 70, right? 70 translations of a book on these stones. It's gotten quite wild. Okay, Alexandra, please.
I'm very touched by this commandment, because to me what it emphasizes is how in Judaism, in the Torah, education is supposed to be for everybody. It's not just for the elite few. It's not just for those who can understand it in its original, possibly erudite form. It has to be accessible to all, in a way that's understandable, whether that is in other languages or just sort of other metaphorical languages, ways of understanding information. And so I'm very moved by it, and I'm very proud of it, actually, also. And to me, I really love that it was mitzvah was singular. And to me, that goes along with it, and the oneness of everything. We're all in it together. We're all in this unity with God. Everything is one. This is not a stratified world or we're all one.
Yeah. So I mean, I resonate with a lot of those sentiments, that there's something about this that suggests a kind of, what did I call this class? An international Torah, a kind of at least internationally accessible Torah. And that we have some, I think what Alexander is really tuning into is that we have some understanding that there are other people out there. All these rituals and these words are not just for us, but that we might imagine other people coming to learn our tradition, right? That's a very interesting thing to be, for the midrash, for the rabbis to be suggesting. Let me just give you the other. This is a legend, and there are kind of two halves of this legend, or not two halves really, but two moments in this legend. So just as we begin to talk about it, let me give you the other one, which is that we are just looking at Deuteronomy 27 and the stones, which are well expounded. And Rashi says, oh, Be'er Hetev means 70 languages, but it's true actually that at the opening of Deuteronomy, the very first lines of Deuteronomy, we read that these are the words that Moses addressed to all of Israel on the other side of the Jordan, right, before they crossed the Jordan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, little details situating them. And then in the fifth line here, on the other side of the Jordan, Be'ever Yarden, Be'eretz Moab, in the land of Moab, Moses began to expound this Torah, same language. Ho'il Moshe be'er et ha-Torah azot. Be'er et ha-Torah hazot. Moshe, same language there. And what's Rashi going to say? What's Rashi going to say? Same thing. He explained, B'shivim lashon persha lahem. Moses explained it to them in 70 languages. Now that's a wild thing to say, because if it were written down, at least like we're thinking about these other people that are coming through. But in this moment, the other half of the legend is that Moshe, imagine that Moshe was like, okay, Torah in Hebrew. Now, next, the Torah in Aramaic. Okay, now the Torah in Chinese. Next, the Torah in Spanish. Like Moses, in that moment, somehow in the speaking of Deuteronomy, spoke it out in 70 languages. Now, some commentators cannot take this. Some commentators are like, no, it means like the 70 faces of the Torah. That's a famous phrase in Jewish tradition. 70 aspects, 70 intentions, 70 ways of understanding the Torah. But the Midrash, as Rashi brings it to us, is Moses explained the Torah to people in 70 different languages. Of course, Moses knows 70 languages. And then you will eventually write that Torah down. Now now there's a little bit of a fuller picture of how those 70 languages are playing into this story. Okay, so let's continue now. Let's continue to play with this image to wonder what exactly is going on here and what function these 70 languages of Torah serve. Robert and then Yonatan.
Well, what struck me is it seems like what's happening here is they're constructing a situation that God or Moses or somebody anyway is trying to make unforgettable. They're trying to impress upon the entire nation, okay, you're going into the land of Israel, and many of you might think, well, we're going to go in there to conquer the land. Yeah, we're going to do that, but it's not going to be like any other conquering. You've got to remember what the heck we're actually doing here, what our mission is, and we're trying to do, just like, in the Shema, says, okay, you have tzitzis, you have mezuzahs, you have tefillin, you have all these. You're going to read the Shema every day, 3 times. You got to remember what the heck your mission is. And that's what they're trying to do here, is to create these major symbols so you cannot possibly forget why you're here. I think that's what he's trying to do.
Yeah. And I mean, that sounds right to me. And then the question is, symbols for us or symbols for 70 different nations, 70 different kinds of people, symbols for them. And by the way, there's a certain kind of conquering that is accepted the law, or, in this sort of like post-crusade, post-colonial world that we not entirely post-colonial world that we live in, we have a familiar image of like, you know, and maybe this is a nobler version of conquering, or maybe it's just a different version of conquering. I don't know. But like I'm not saying this is what Robert was saying, but one version of it is, we're here to conquer the land. You could accept the Torah though. Look, read. That's certainly one way of understanding what might be happening here, I think. But again, that's my riff on Robert. I'm not sure that's what Robert was saying. Yonatan.
Well, also,
oh yeah, go ahead, Robert.
We're also a mixed rabble, right? There's all kinds of people, and maybe they speak all kinds of different languages. Maybe they don't speak Hebrew.
Great. I think I want to have Yonatan pick up on that. That's a great point. Yonatan, can you jump in here?
Oh, I was snapping because I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
But I'm actually not. I don't want to talk about the 70 languages. I'm still stuck on the stones. A couple of points on the Hebrew. The first one being, I'm not sure who translated seed as plaster. I think that's not a good translation. It's lime. It's whitewash. So they're not plastering the stones. They're whitewashing the stones, and they're not engraving writing upon them. They're just writing upon them in the Hebrew. And I don't know how much it changes the meaning, but I did want to bring that in there.
Does it make it, Yonatan, a little bit more like what you're describing? Sounds a little more like a blackboard. Like it's like there's a film on it so that they can write, but then you know, it's like it's not carved in. It's like it's a little bit like what Wayne was saying before. Like it could be reconfigured or erased or something.
Yeah, you're working a lot more with the stones. You're still covering them. You're covering them like in this, you know, paper thin, not even paper thin, thinner than paper layer, and you're not carving into anything. Interesting. That's just by way of semantics. What was really interesting to me in this section is that violence against stones is like, actually, this isn't the only place that shows up in the Torah. But I know how much you love parallels, but there's kind of this anti-parallel going on here, which we don't see often. We know that Moses hits a stone, but there's a different word used, and I almost think the Torah is being deliberately different here, because we have this word combination of anim gdolot, right, like large stones, where normally you would just say slaim, which means large stones. And it's like that's what he hit, and that's not what's happening here, right? Yeah. These stones that we're not supposed to hit are deliberately being called by a different name, and I don't have a formulated answer what that means, but it almost seems like it's saying to us, like, this is a totally different case, right? Like that stone represented something very different from this stone.
Yeah. Okay, good. There is actually like a real serious like investigation to be done here. Compare, you know, it's like what's the old saying? How many words does an Eskimo have for snow? Many more than we have, right? So desert wanderers have a lot of words for rocks. You know, and so there's Tsur and there's Sela and there's Eben and there and there's work to be done here parsing all those different terms out. I don't think can go too deep down that road today, but where then we would have to think, what is the function of stones and avanim, and where this kind of this sort of form. And I guess, you know, we could do some investigation, but one of the pieces we have right in front of us is that an altar is also built of avanim shlemot, right? So there's these objects are being used to both create a space of sacrifice and worship, and also to whatever version of blackboard or engraving or, oh, and by the way, nobody has said this yet, but I think it's worth saying that, like, somebody out there, I'm sure, is thinking, well, isn't this a feature of the ancient world? And, you know, if you this is just a silly Google ancient stone pillars writing, but, you know, these forms existed in the ancient world, and particularly, as you can see, in Egypt. So the idea of communicating messages on standing stones, Hammurabi's code, for example, was like inscribed on a great pillar so that you could read it. And okay, so there's a tradition that exists out there. Okay, I'll take a couple more comments from folks I haven't heard from yet. I'm going to take a comment from Leah. Oh, International Torah. So it's good to have a comment from Japan. And then we'll see if we have time for one more. And then I want to bring us to one one final and really explosive piece. Leah Matsui, how are you doing?
Fine. I saw a 3-minute animation and I was very enchanted by it. So this is not completely my original thought, but I think Randy and I are married and we both have wedding rings. We're two human beings, so we both have fingers, most humans do, and we have wedding rings, which match, sort of. But here we're looking at a finalization of a marriage between human beings and God. So each is going to require a different covenantal something. God doesn't need a billboard written on plaster. Unhewn, uncut, he can read it. Whereas we are going to need something more accessible. Therefore, we can get plaster so that to not injure the stone in any way, and then it can be written upon us. It's the same agreement, although the two parties are not agreeing to exactly the same thing. And I think the 70 languages is about, as someone said, you know, we're a mixed multitude. So God can speak in the way that 70 of us with 70 radically different ways of perceiving things can still understand what the message is that needs to be communicated. I think it's almost like, what do they call that? Ketubah?
Yeah.
So
I'm instructed.
Yeah. Hashem is saying, God is saying, the ketubah that I'm going to need will be in a little different form than what you guys need. You guys need a little more help. You need the training wheels. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, this is so great. Yeah. What you've done here. And you're bringing us back to an important frame that we haven't caught at all just yet, because I've been like really pushing us to think about the kind of the international feeling here. But Leah brings us back to just the idea that there's an altar and there's a pillar. Who is the altar for and who is the pillar for? And on some basic level, the altar is for God. It's for us to offer to God, to send things God's way. The pillar is for us. It's what God sends our way. And God sends Torah our way. And there's an exchange. We make offerings to God. We're in relationship with God. God makes offerings to us. And now I will build a little bit with the language piece and say, and when God speaks, everybody understands. You know, when God speaks in 70 languages at once. All right. And so this is on some level a kind of symbolic. This is just my addition to what Leo was saying. But if the pillars are God's version of here, I offer this to you, then again, it becomes intriguing to think I offer it to you and anyone who can understand. We didn't emphasize, somebody said that Robert said that there's like a kind of a mixed multitude, and it could be that there are many languages spoken in the people of Israel. It's like hard to know exactly what languages they're coming with, an Egyptian and along the way, and those who joined the mass, the mixed multitude, etc. Okay, let me take one more comment from Ari, and then we're going to look at one last piece.
We've put a very nice LA liberal Jewish spin on this. As someone who used to work in politics and international relations, let me give you the real politique version. This isn't a nice proselytizing. This is a sign of ownership and a toll booth. Right? And a Declaration of Independence, all wrapped in one. When Ben-Gurion declares a state, he declares the state, right? This is a Declaration of Independence, given in all the languages to everyone. If you want to come into our new land, here are the laws you're going to follow, kind of like Old West. You want to, come into Tombstone, you got to deposit the guns at, what does the Torah say fundamentally? It says a bunch of stuff, but one of it is, this is our land, right? And I think the altar, right, could be for the Jews. I don't know the tradition, but it could also, I imagine, be, you want to be a trader and come here? It's like a toll booth. Here's where you have to deposit your sacrifice. Here's the rules you're going to have to follow. it's very clearly to me, I mean, it might have a proselytizing aspect, but it's very clear to me an ownership aspect and a legal, that's why the Egyptians are putting the stuff everywhere too. It's like, here, come in, Ramses is the Pharaoh, pray all to him. This is our, it's like same, I'm from Chicago. Welcome to Chicago, Richard J. Daley Mayor. This is telling you where you are, who you owe.
Richard Daley, God,
yeah,
God of Chicago.
If you know Chicago,
I hear what you're saying, Ari. I hear what you're saying, and you're not, you're not wrong. That's also a very legitimate way to think of these things. These are, and the commentators, as I alluded to earlier, they sort of struggle with this. They can't imagine as the Western liberal, like as Ari characterized it, approach of like, oh, this is Torah for everybody, yay, international United Nations Torah. They can't imagine that, and so they have other interpretations. Ari's is certainly one that this is like this is a stake in the ground saying the Torah owns this land, God owns this land, we own this land, to all who might read. Right? Okay, I legit. I want to take us to this last piece, and there is something about what you said that does take us there, which is, let's stop for a moment thinking about what these 70 languages might mean for the rest of the world. Let's think more about what it means for us. And Ari's thinking about what the structure, means for us, the people of Israel, but I want to think about the idea of 70 languages itself. Why would Moses, for example, according to the legend, speak the Torah to the people in 70 languages? What is that? What function does that serve? Why do the people need 70 renderings of the Torah? So on this, there is a very famous piece by the Kedushat Levi. The Kedushat Levi is one of the early Hasidic masters, 18th century, and he's got just like a very startling and potent understanding of the way that language works in the Torah. It's let's take a look here. All right, so we're back at the ancient pillars. Okay, so Kedushat Levi. This is Hasidic Torah right here. So a look at Rashi, based on the Tanchuma, that's the Midrash Rashi borrowed from, shows us that Moses translated the Torah into 70 languages. But why did Moses find it necessary to translate the Torah into all the known languages at the time? That's a little bit of an embellished translation. But why did Moses translate it into 70 languages? Okay, so there's two parts to this. First part, he's going to prove a point. Okay, it is an acceptable principle that on occasion, the Torah has some words in Aramaic, such as Yagar Sahaduta, the stone of witness, Yagar Sahaduta, whereas Jacob named the very same heap of stones Galed, its Hebrew equivalent, in Genesis 31:47. Now we could go look at that, but let me just tell you what he means. This word, this really looks like Aramaic, Yagar Sahaduta, but it was Aramaic, and it's not a secret. The Torah says it explicitly that Jacob made a pact with his father-in-law Lavan, and they made it over a pile of stones. I told you that earlier, actually. And Jacob called it by a Hebrew name, but it says Lavan called it Yagar Saduta. Lavan had his own language for it. So the Torah is just saying in another language, it would be rendered this. Okay, but the Kedushat Levi is just interested in the fact that there are other languages in the Torah. And he's going to give a couple more examples. These are all based on like wild midrashic suggestions that are, not philologically necessarily sound. But here's a couple of other examples. So too with all the languages of the world. Now that was a big thing he just said. The Torah has some words in Aramaic, and so too with shar umot, lashon shel shar umot. So too with all the languages of the world. For example, the word totafot. Now, what is totafot? Totafot is the tefillin, the prayer box you place on your head. The word totafot tells us, the rabbis, what is totafot? Tot means two in Caspian, and fot means two in African. There's no language African. I don't know what the language Caspian is, but those are the referencing places here in the Talmud. Katfi va'afriki. So there are African languages in the Torah, there are Caspian languages in the Torah, and similarly, hen, which is in the Torah in the blessings of Bilam, hen in Greek means one. And the rabbis have a little like spin. Oh, there's a word of Greek in the Torah. Now, is that true? I think a sober linguist would say no. But he's a Hasidic, he's a mystic. And so what he's saying is that so it is that all the other languages from foreign nations are written into the Torah. Okay. Now, that's a very, very big thing. He just said the Torah has in it like pieces of the languages of all the nations of the world. You can find some piece of Greek, some piece of African languages, Caspian languages, and Aramaic in the Torah. And then this is what he says, and I regret that we don't have more time to, I see now we're coming to the end of our hour, but it will all be worth it for this next paragraph. Take a look at this. One of the reasons for this, v'chad tamhu, is that the language of every nation is the life force of that nation. Ki halashon shel kol ha'umot hu achiyut min ha'umah. And Hebrew, the holy tongue, is the distinct language of Israel. And indeed, they first heard the Torah at Mount Sinai in the holy tongue. Now listen to this. But the Holy Blessed One, who sees from beginning to end, mireshit acharit, saw that Israel would have to be in exile. Saw that we would have to be in exile. And so for this reason, wrote into the Torah the languages of all nations. God knew, Moses knew, that we were going into the diaspora. And so God encoded elements of every language in the world into the Torah. What's the reason? So that through this, they would have the ability, we would have the ability to take hold of the life force of each one through the language of the Holy Torah, so that Israel would be able to find resilience in exile. And originally I translated it as survival. They would be able to start. The word is tkuma, which does mean survival, but I want to translate it as like uprightness, resilience, rebounding. Okay. So what's the theory here? The idea is the Torah contains all languages because, maybe somebody else wants to help me speak this out, but because we can, through the Torah, access the life force of every culture, every nation, every language on earth. Because, and this is a profound thing to say, because the language is the life force of a nation. Okay, so what do we like? Let's hear a little. Let's build a little bit on that. What do folks think about? Susan, you're sort of shrugging. Oh no, you're talking to someone else. Yeah. Yes. No. Yes.
Yeah. It's a little far-fetched, but okay. I mean, the idea is that we can understand it at the level that we need to understand it.
Okay.
And I'll accept, and I'll let it go at that.
All right. Susan is not impressed. Sid is not impressed. Mark, what do you think?
I'm uncomfortable with the sense of how much that interpretation supports chosen people and the chosen people in a dominant role. It's as if nothing really good in the world, that divinity, that godliness cannot flow simply because it flows, but rather it has to flow through the Hebrew people.
Yeah.
The Jewish people and the Jewish experience. And what that does is that challenges Jewish participation in any form of deep ecumenism or interfaith work. It says we're already starting out with a leg up. And I think this is, and I candidly think that this is at the minimum, an uncomfortable, and on longer end, maybe even a dangerous posture to explore.
Okay, all right. I hear that interpretation. I'm going like I want to acknowledge what you're saying, which is that there's something about this that has elements of like everything good comes from the Torah. Like all the cultures of the world owe their existence, their being to the Torah. Everything should be seen through the Torah. The Torah is the only lens. The Torah has all the information in it. Don't engage with other cultures. You don't need other cultures. Like I really hear where you're going with this, Mark. My own impression of this text is such that I'm going to kind of respectfully disagree in certain ways, which is that it's true, and I said this, that this is not a thought about like, oh, how are other people going to benefit from our Torah? It's much more a thought of like what is the use for us of these 70 languages and these elements? And he's got a particular theory of it, but I have to say, there's something about his description that to me feels like such a different Torah than the Torah of particularism and separatism that you're talking about. Because, I mean, look, Jews being a chosen nation, that is part of the tradition. Like on some level, we're gonna have to grapple with that concept but what does it mean to be a chosen nation? What does it mean to have the sacred book? What does it mean to have a relationship with Torah? Torah is anything but particularistic. Torah has within it the capacity to open your mind to the entire world. And that's how I'm reading it, and I hear that you're not. But to me, this is such a powerful text because it suggests that somehow a deep immersion in the Torah would help me to see connections between the Torah, not just in like my own life, religion, language, people, land, but actually I would have some way of using my Torah to move out into the world and to interact with others and to understand, the Torah, in other words, would make me more worldly instead of more closed in. And we have a debate here, but I like this vision because then the stones that are placed there in those 70 language become a kind of a monument, not just to the greatness of the Torah, but to the kind of the infinite nature of the Torah, and that to me is a Torah that I can believe in. So we'll leave it there. But I hope you enjoyed the journey, and just respectful disagreements, let them stand. All right. Good rest of your week, everybody. Shabbat shalom to you all, and I'll see you next week.